Good morning. Today, I want to dive into the controversial 1978 film, Debbie Does Dallas. One of the goals of this channel is to live life to the fullest, and that includes my passion for reviewing controversial movies, particularly those from the 70s. I love exploring the controversies in films and discussing what we can learn from the past. Debbie Does Dallas reflects a time when sexual harassment was largely ignored in workplaces, and toxic male stereotypes prevailed. It portrays the alpha male as someone who effortlessly seduces women, reinforcing damaging attitudes that were prevalent in the 1970s. This stereotype not only trivializes the seriousness of consent, but also perpetuates the idea that men in power can exploit their positions without consequence. In my video essay, I'll focus on these controversies, highlighting how the film normalizes predatory behavior and showcases the lack of awareness surrounding sexual harassment during that era. I'll also delve into the stereotypes of the dumb blonde and the predatory alpha male, which are still relevant in discussions about gender dynamics today. By examining Debbie Does Dallas, we can gain valuable insights into how far we've come and the work that still lies ahead in addressing these issues in film and society at large. The movie opens with Debbie, played by Bambi Woods, and her friends practicing cheerleading. It's unclear whether they're in high school or college at this point in the film, but Debbie shares her dream of trying out for the Dallas cheerleaders. Her parents expect her to raise the funds, so her friends decide to help by getting part-time jobs. In a rather comedic scene, they shower together, and the upbeat music creates a cute vibe, almost a fourth wall of how these girls are oblivious to the fact that they are on camera and the viewer at home are watching them shower, just like how some movies you'd see a person putting a hole in a wall, spying on women showering. Arcadia Lake, who plays Tammy, gets a job at a local record store. She mentions quitting her last job due to her previous manager's inappropriate behavior. The store owner hires her but immediately crosses boundaries by putting his arm around her. This highlights one of the film's main controversies. In the 70s, such actions were often overlooked, whereas today, they would be considered sexual harassment. The film showcases the naivety of Tammy, Debbie, and their friends, as their new bosses exhibit predatory behavior. Next, Debbie approaches Mr. Greenfield, played by Robert Kerman, who is anxious to hire her. He fantasizes about her during their conversation, indicating that he sees hiring her as a way to fulfill his sexual fantasies of being with the cheerleader. Debbie embodies the dumb blonde stereotype, oblivious to his creepy behavior. This reinforces the troubling dynamic where he exploits her need for money, blurring the lines between employment and sexual exploitation. Later, he offers to pay for her entire trip after they fuck, which illustrates the normalization of sexual predatory behavior. After cheerleading and football practice, where cheerleaders and football players engage in a sexually charged encounter in the female shower area, the players, completely nude, casually mention that they locked the door, suggesting a deliberate disregard for boundaries. The use of Mrs. to refer to their supervising teacher hints at their status as high school seniors, an age where the exploration of sexuality is often complicated by societal pressures and norms. While the actors may be in their early 20s, they are portrayed as teenagers, raising concerns about the depiction of adolescent sexual behavior and potential exploitation. Unlike the controversial film Kids, which presented the harsh realities and consequences of such behavior, this film seems to gloss over the implications, presenting a sanitized version of teenage sexuality. The first sex scene, lasting approximately 12 minutes, features a background score that attempts to romanticize the encounter, framing it as both passionate and enjoyable, despite its lack of substance. Following this introduction, the film transitions to a montage showcasing the three female protagonists as they navigate their jobs, with their bosses observing them in ways that suggest objectification. Debbie, for instance, is shown sweeping in front of a sports store while Mr. Greenfield leers at her. In a record store, Tammy receives assistance from her manager, who inappropriately positions his arm around her waist and feels her exposed bra, blurring the lines of professional conduct. Another character working at a tennis court bends over to pick up balls, revealing her lack of underwear, which invites unwelcome attention from her boss. This montage reinforces harmful stereotypes, male bosses sexualizing their employees, female characters appearing oblivious to the advances, and a troubling acceptance of sexual harassment in the workplace. The narrative takes a darker turn when Mr. Greenfield invites Debbie to stay late at the store, revealing that he has locked the door. As Debbie expresses her need for extra money for an upcoming trip, Mr. Greenfield exploits this vulnerability, suggesting that she could earn money by exposing herself. His nervous demeanor and stumbling speech hint at deeper issues, possibly indicating a sex addiction. When he offers her $10, equivalent to $50 today, for a sexual favor, Debbie's shock is palpable. Yet her body language suggests a disconcerting naivety, reminiscent of individuals who struggle with social cues. Instead of reacting with anger or fear, she hesitates, ultimately succumbing to the pressure of financial necessity. The interaction exemplifies not only sexual harassment, but also statutory rape, as Greenfield wields his authority to manipulate Debbie into compliance. Her eventual willingness to negotiate for higher payment further perpetuates the stereotype that women can be easily swayed by monetary incentives, reinforcing predatory dynamics at play. The next scene, the girls go to the locker room area, and talk about how much money that they made. It's revealed that they haven't made a lot by working. However, Debbie comes in and reveals that she made 30% of what they need for all of them to go down to Texas for her Dallas cheerleader tryout. Debbie mentions that the best way to make money is for the girls to offer themselves physically, and some of them are skeptical because they don't want to lose their virginity. So, Debbie mentions that you can do sexual acts without losing your virginity. It's not explained in the movie, but what this means is that anything but vaginal penetration is considered losing your virginity. And then the girls all agree that this is what they're going to do with everybody that they work with going forward, to offer themselves up, and they also teach each other techniques that they do on their boyfriends. They also mentioned that many of them who are still virgins do that same type sexual behavior that they don't think is a loss of virginity. So this does talk about a couple of issues such as virginity myths and understanding that any type of sexual behavior is still considered sexual. So when these characters who are portrayed as teenagers are doing that, it's technically statutory rape and child prostitution without them considering it. Even though this may be touchy subject matter to mention, it's very important because it shows how deep rape myths and sexual myths were at the time, and still that there's some people who have a lack of education of understanding that any type of sexual contact, be it vaginal penetration or not, is still a sexual act. This scene also talks about a bit of a group mentality, because they all agree to engagement their male bosses this way, so somebody who doesn't agree looks like an oddball. The other thing is that perpetuates the stereotype that the only way to make money quickly for women is prostitution. Afterward, Roberta is caught by Mrs. Hardwick using a toy on herself while she is supposed to be working. Mrs. Hardwick confronts her, putting her hands on Roberta and saying, "So this is what you're doing when you should be working." What follows is an unsettling manipulation as Mrs. Hardwick forces Roberta to sit down and discuss her sexual behavior, insisting that it's acceptable. Throughout this encounter, Mrs. Hardwick touches Roberta repeatedly, while Roberta displays clear naivety, unaware that Mrs. Hardwick is attempting to persuade her into a sexual experience. When Mr. Hardwick enters, the situation escalates as both he and his wife coerce Roberta into sexual acts. They begin by convincing her to stay, and whenever she tries to leave, they pull her back onto the couch, initiating unwanted physical contact. Roberta eventually becomes aroused and engages in sexual activity, a disturbing cliché common in pornographic films where a girl's initial discomfort transforms into consent. This narrative implies that violating boundaries can lead to enjoyment, which is harmful, and perpetuates the myth that a victim's eventual acceptance of unwanted advances equates to consent. The music during this scene is heavenly, framing Roberta's experience in a way that obscures the reality of her coercion. Whether or not she is a virgin, the scene implies a troubling acceptance of losing her virginity under duress, presenting a narrative where discomfort is overshadowed by the eventual satisfaction of sexual arousal. This portrayal is not only disturbing, but also reinforces the harmful notion that sexual assault can evolve into consent. In the next scene, two girls decide to go to Mr. Bradley's house to wash his car, which quickly devolves into a playful water fight with the hose. When Mr. Bradley arrives, he tells them to come inside to avoid getting pneumonia from washing his car in the rain. Notably, he never invited them to clean his car. The girls assumed they would get paid for it. Once inside, they make it clear to Mr. Bradley that they know about his interests, and through their subtext, it becomes evident that they are willing to engage in prostitution. Although Mr. Bradley hesitates, concerned about his wife finding out, he ultimately succumbs to their advances. This scene stands out as one of the most provocative in the film, particularly because it features female characters initiating the offer of sex. The girls propose a series of increasingly explicit services, starting at $10 to show their bodies, $25 for kisses all over, and escalating to a three-way that includes anal sex. The scene builds tension as they engage in these acts just before Mrs. Bradley is expected home. It plays into the wet t-shirt girl fantasy and the allure of infidelity, creating a narrative where the girls take the initiative, yet Mr. Bradley's complicity cannot be overlooked. While the girls are undeniably at fault for offering themselves for prostitution, Mr. Bradley shares the blame for giving in to their propositions. This reinforces troubling stereotypes: women auctioning themselves off, and men depicted as immature and unable to resist sexual advances, even at the cost of their marriages and reputations. The scene ultimately perpetuates harmful notions about gender dynamics, portraying men as incapable of turning down sex, regardless of the consequences. In the next scene, Donna is about to enter the library, and her boyfriend, Tim, is upset because she's too busy with work for them to spend time together. Inside the library, she encounters Mr. Biddle, an older gentleman who has been stalking her during previous scenes. Their conversation reveals that Donna is trying to seduce him with talk of a business venture she and Debbie are starting. Tim, who has returned to the library, immediately grabs Donna's ass and lifts her up, declaring his desperation for her in an exaggerated manner, saying he could jump off a bridge. He then starts kissing her breasts, despite her clear discomfort. Although they are in a relationship, it's unclear if she has ever consented to such behavior, and in this moment, it is evident that she is unhappy with Tim's advances. This highlights a dangerous relationship boundary myth, that a man can physically assert himself on a female partner without it being considered sexual harassment. Consent is always paramount, and objectifying one's partner is unacceptable. This scene illustrates a toxic dynamic where Tim feels entitled to touch Donna whenever he pleases, presenting a harmful portrayal of male-female relationships. Later, Donna performs oral sex on Tim, claiming she learned it from her girlfriends, only to be caught by Mr. Biddle. Tim hurriedly asks to leave the library, played for laughs as he exposes his bare backside while fleeing. Donna is sent to Mr. Biddle's office for punishment, and she becomes hysterical at the thought of her parents finding out, fearing the common repercussions of that era, being sent to an all-girls or religious school for sexually inappropriate behavior. However, Mr. Biddle decides that the best punishment is to spank her instead of informing her parents. During the spanking, Donna feels aroused despite the physical punishment, and Mr. Biddle further violates her by grabbing her buttock. He coerces her into confessing the services that she and the other girls provide, and as she submissively responds, he spanks her bare bottom without mercy. This situation exemplifies the abuse of power by a school official exploiting his authority for sexual favors, highlighting a blatant double standard in punishing Donna and Tim while ignoring his predatory behavior. The dynamics of fear and manipulation, with threats of job loss, parental discovery, or expulsion, reveal the disturbing lengths to which Mr. Biddle will go to fulfill his desires. In the next scene, Lisa is working for Hamilton, picking up tennis balls and other items off the court. While she does this, Hamilton discusses her with his friend Ashley, remarking that Lisa doesn't wear underwear. He demonstrates this by having Lisa pick up a clipboard, exposing her bare backside, which is clad only in a small thong. Hamilton then instructs Lisa to fetch towels and meet them in the locker room. As he and Ashley talk, Hamilton makes a crude gesture, implying that 16-year-old girls are provocative and possess desirable bodies. Also, he states that Debbie and the other girls are 16 years old, providing the services, meaning prostitution. This commentary not only objectifies Lisa, but also underscores the problematic dynamics of an employer-employee relationship, particularly concerning minors. While many states have laws defining the age of consent, there are strict regulations preventing sexual engagement between employers and underage workers. The scene further highlights how Hamilton and Ashley view Lisa as a sexual object, discussing her behind her back in a way that trivializes her autonomy. The film frames their behavior as cool, failing to critique the misogyny embedded in their attitudes. This leads to a three-way encounter in a locker room resembling a shower sauna. Hamilton puts his hand on Ashley and unzips her shirt, yet it's evident that Ashley is complicit in this behavior, suggesting an acceptance of the prostitution-like dynamics at play. However, the scene is abruptly cut short, serving as a lead-in to the penultimate climax of the movie. This moment encapsulates the troubling themes of objectification and the normalization of exploitative sexual dynamics, particularly concerning young women. The penultimate of film features a brief sex scene involving Lisa, Tammy, and a record store employee, which exemplifies a troubling pattern where two women consent to sexual encounters with one man for money. In another scene, Debbie is organizing shoes when Mr. Greenfield gives her an inappropriate hug, touching her chest area. He tells her that she is the only girl he desires and offers to pay for her trip, including hotel and travel expenses for all her friends, if she agrees to have sex with him. Mr. Greenfield then uses the store intercom to instruct her to lock the door and meet him in the mezzanine. Dressed as a cowgirl, Debbie finds humor in the situation when she encounters Mr. Greenfield, who is dressed as the football team captain, and exposes himself. Their playful chase around the store culminates with him laying her down on a bench used for weightlifting, where he positions himself between her legs while still clothed. Mr. Greenfield expresses a desire to be the football captain, hinting at an inferiority complex that drives his predatory behavior. This dynamic raises troubling parallels to discussions of sexual assault, where individuals may seek power through exploitative means to compensate for personal inadequacies. While the eventual sexual encounter between Mr. Greenfield and Debbie appears consensual, his behavior throughout the film raises significant concerns regarding sexual harassment and predation. Notably, he expresses a desire to make love to the captain of the cheerleading squad, and the ensuing 10-minute sex scene is framed as a triumph, culminating in a scoreboard celebrating his sexual conquest. This portrayal rewards Mr. Greenfield's predatory behavior without consequences, echoing characterizations of figures like Glenn Quagmire from Family Guy. Ultimately, these scenes highlight deeply disturbing themes that normalize sexual predatory behavior and present these men as cool for their conquests. They depict women as either willing participants or naive to the implications of their sexual experiences, lacking agency in the face of predatory advances. This representation reinforces harmful stereotypes, portraying sexual predation as an accepted norm while framing women's decisions as transactional. While the film may be viewed as a pornographic comedy, it is essential to recognize its broader societal implications. For much of human history, women have been objectified, and myths surrounding rape and inappropriate behavior have permeated media and culture. Examples include the historical treatment of female slaves as sexual objects without consequence, and religious texts encouraging women to submit sexually. Additionally, societal norms from previous decades often trivialized inappropriate behavior, such as workplace harassment portrayed in films from the 1950s and 60s. Despite the controversial nature of Debbie Does Dallas, it reflects deeper societal issues regarding women's objectification and the normalization of sexual advances without accountability. While recent movements have prompted positive changes in addressing sexual harassment and advocating for consent, this film serves as a reminder of a time when such behavior was largely accepted. In conclusion, although some characters in the film engage in consensual acts, the portrayal of prostitution and the employer-employee dynamic raises significant ethical concerns. While debates about the legality of prostitution continue, it is crucial that any such interactions involve informed consent and an understanding of the implications, which is often lacking in this film. Ultimately, while Debbie Does Dallas can be interpreted as a satire of sexual predatory behavior, it is essential to approach this interpretation critically, as it may not align with the director's intent. Further exploration of the film's controversies could provide additional insights, but that discussion is best reserved for another analysis.